lot of people, I think possibly, dare I say, including Donald Trump, talk about rare earths. There is a significant chance they don't know what on earth they're going on about.
I'm joined now by Joey Durso, senior data journalist at The Times, who I persist in calling a Danish journalist, but not today.
No, you managed it. I don't know where that comes from, to be honest. We need to get past that.
It's just a speech impediment, I think. How are you? You well?
I'm good. I'm very well, thank you.
Feeling Danish?
Always,
every day. Let's start, as we inevitably start these days, with Donald Trump. We're going to talk about what he's got planned for Ukraine first. We were going to talk about but he's posted on his Truth Social account a bizarre AI-generated video with this soundtrack.
Donald is coming to set you free, bringing the light for all to see. No more tunnels, no more fear. Trump Gaza is finally here. Trump Gaza shining bright, golden future, a brand new life. Feast and dance, the deal is done. Trump Gaza, #1.
Yeah, so we'll come to Ukraine in a minute. That's Gaza. This is a video. It shows the rubble of Gaza being turned into a beach resort. It shows Elon Musk sipping on a cocktail, throwing money to laughing children. There's people dancing on the beach. There's a golden statue of Donald Trump. There's a golden balloon of Donald Trump's head. Joey, is it the maddest thing you've ever seen?
It is certainly up there. I mean, it's part of this whole thing. Trump speaks about the Riviera of the Middle East. You know, you've got Dubai on one side of the Gulf. It's pretty poor taste, I think it's fair to say, given the state of Gaza at the moment. It's just mad. Like, I'm sure many of us occasionally get sent strange things by older relatives on WhatsApp and wonder where it comes from. The President of the United States is, one of those people who's being sent mad things by who knows and then sharing them with the world.
Oh, do we think he's been sent it rather than made it?
Well, I don't think he's made it himself.
Well, not personally, obviously, but had it made? Who knows?
Who knows? I mean, he wakes up in the morning, he gets up very early, doesn't he? He goes on his phone. Did he go on Truth Social, which is all, a lot even madder than Twitter?
Someone sent it to him. I mean, I've been my entire career as a journalist, I sort of started off as a satirical journalist, writing parodies of the mad things that politicians might be doing. I don't know what to do anymore.
No.
What am I meant to do that's madder than this? This is as mad as it gets.
Yeah, he's a hard man to satirise, isn't he?
Even by his standards, it's impossible. It's impossible to imagine that this is happening.
I remember sort of 7 or 8 years ago, I was working in politics at the BBC, and every morning, so it'd be about 11 a.m. UK time, everyone would be, sort of word would go around, he's tweeted, and it'd be like sort of 6 a.m, he'd wake up, and, lying in bed or whatever, and tweet something mad, and then the world reacts to it, and that will be the next 4 years.
Yeah. Well, and we're going to be talking later about the idea of him doing a deal in Ukraine over rare earths, and you're kind of like, is that less mad? Because we've got to sort of respond to everything he says as if it were real. And maybe just...
this is real. It's very real.
But maybe it all just comes from the same place. It's the same, you say you're going to do a deal with Ukraine, you tweet a mad video of yourself with a golden head and Elon Musk throwing money. It's all just... and it sort of dominates everything, and you've got to talk about it. Speaking of which, one of the impacts that the increasing Trumpishness of the world has had on Britain is Keir Starmer's announcement yesterday that the UK is going to crank up defence spending and shrink the international aid budget. The Defence Secretary, John Healey, spoke to Times Radio Breakfast.
This is an increase in the baseline defence spending, the biggest increase since the end of the Cold War. It delivers a manifesto commitment that we made at the election to increase defence spending in the UK to levels we've not seen for 15 years since Labour was last in government. And we're doing this because the world has changed. We face a new era of threats. We've got to forge a new era for defence that makes Britain safer and stronger. And that's why the difficult decisions that Keir Starmer laid out in the House of Commons have been made by this Prime Minister.
Joey, you've been looking into the statistics, as any good Danish journalist should. What have you found out? Where does this leave us compared to the rest of the world?
Well, so Britain is now almost leading the pack in terms of the NATO countries in terms of defence spending. 2% is this sort of sacred thing in NATO that everyone should spend more than 2%. For a long time, they didn't. Britain did. It's 2.33 at the moment. It's going up to 2.5 by 2027. And then the target is 3% by 2033, which is a lot and means money won't be spent on other things. The long-term picture is, of course, during the Second World War, we spent an awful lot more on defence than we do now. It was about 7% in the 50s and has basically slowly fallen, hitting a trough in sort of the 90s, which, after the Cold War, everything looked very peaceful, and then has been fairly constant since. But this remilitarisation of Europe is, since the invasion of Ukraine in 2022. Germany famously almost didn't have a military for decades for the fairly obvious reason that, Germans in uniform had a bad reputation, it's safe to say. But after 2022, Olaf Scholz, the Chancellor, just said, we're scrapping that, we're remilitarising, and now they spend a lot on the military. So Europe is a far more militarized place than it was 5 or 10 years ago.
Is a percentage of GDP the best way to understand this? Because, of course, Britain's an immeasurably richer country than it was in the 50s.
Sure, yeah. And also military hardware is a lot more expensive.
Well, sure, yeah.
And well, Britain is immeasurably richer than it was in the 50s. It's not that much richer than it was in the
in the 90s.
In the 90s,
yeah,
to be
sure.
honest.
Fair enough.
But yeah, the cost of of a RAF jet it's so expensive. This really high end military tech.
Right, and look,
but the USA spends by far the most. I think 40% of the world's military spending is in the US, which is absolutely crazy. I mean, it's impossible to comprehend how huge the US military is.
And look, when it comes to aid spending, how do we compare? We're a big spender on aid, right?
Well, yeah, although it's slowly going down. I mean, 0.7 was again this big international deal. I think in the 2000s, and it's gone down to 0.5. It's going down to 0.5 to 0.3, which is a huge change. And there'll be big projects cut. There'll be very good causes around the world. As the AIDS charities will be on the radio this morning, there'll be people that die as a direct result of this. It's a big deal. I mean, in a sense, it's kind of interesting that this 0.7% lasted for so long, because I don't think the pressure was really coming from the public. I mean, people quite consistently aren't a huge fan of foreign aid spending. They'd rather the money be spent on schools and hospitals that they pay taxes to. But it came out of certainly that Labour government. And then when David Cameron...
He put it in law, didn't he?
Yeah. And it was part of this sort of detoxification of the Conservative Party. They didn't want to be seen as these right-wing headbangers anymore. They wanted to win over Lib Dem voters and whatever else. I mean, and the politics of that have changed a lot. And I think, but a Labour government slashing aid spending is you wouldn't have guessed that 10, 15 years ago.
You wouldn't have guessed it necessarily 10 or 15 days ago, I think.
Yeah.
Let's talk about that rare earths deal with Ukraine that the US appears to be talking about. President Zelensky is expected to travel to the US to sign the deal as soon as Friday. It would reportedly involve the US jointly developing Ukraine's mineral wealth, with revenues going to a newly created fund. Donald Trump claims it will compensate for billions of dollars of military aid.
He would like to sign it together with me, and I understand that's a big deal, very big deal. And I think the American people, even if you look at polling, they're very happy because, Biden was throwing money around like it's cotton candy. And it's a very big deal. Look, it could be $1 trillion deal.
Well, Donald Trump wouldn't say it was a big deal if it wasn't a big deal. We've learned that. But let's find out if he might be right or wrong. Ed Conway is Sky News' economics and data editor. So we've got two data experts. I'm sure we can sort this out. Ed, hello. Good morning.
Hey, you're right.
Look, you're an expert in stuff. What are rare earth minerals to start with?
Oh my God. Okay, so rare earths are a very specific part of the periodic table. So when a lot of people, I think possibly, dare I say, including Donald Trump, talk about rare earths, there is a significant chance they don't know what on earth they're going on about, because most people don't really know the difference between rare earths and other critical minerals. But actually, if you're being really pedantic, if you're being a scientist or a geologist, rare earths are a very specific part of the periodic table. It's a kind of little box that you see down at the bottom of the periodic table, of things like neodymium and selenium and a few other things. And these minerals, they're quite important because when you sprinkle them on other things like steel or indeed magnets, they just make them a lot more powerful. So it's best to think of them as a kind of condiment for an industry. Okay. And so like the earphones that a lot of people will be listening to this in, they work thanks to neodymium magnets, okay? Because you've got a little magnet in them. And if it wasn't for rare earths, you wouldn't be able to fit that magnet into quite such a small thing. Or the little, AirPods, the very satisfying way they click when they closed. That's neodymium, okay? So basically Apple couldn't really exist in its modern kind of very snazzy state without some neodymium magnets. That's all rare earths. And right now, 90% of that stuff comes from China. And so you can see why everyone's very excited about, finding another source of it. By the way, it's not just snazzy little AirPods. It goes into military hardware. There are lots of very serious uses for rare earths. But most of it comes from China, which is why everyone's, always saying, oh, we really need to find another place to get these rare earths from.
So next question, Ed. Does Ukraine actually have a lot of these things?
No.
Right. You may go. That will be all. No, carry on.
Sure. So as far as anyone knows, okay, because it might be that Donald Trump has this blueprint that no one else has, including the US Geological Survey, which is the best place to get data on this stuff. They say basically Ukraine has next to nothing. The majority of rare earths in terms of, and the other important thing, should have mentioned this at the start, about rare earths is they're not that rare. They're not actually that rare. You can find a lot of them in the ground. In fact, if you go to your garden now and dig, pull a chunk of soil out, there's going to be some rare earths in there. The issue is getting them and turning them into the finished product is just a really dirty, energy-intensive process. And so you kind of, it's less about where they are in the ground and more about some of the kind of processing, which again is why China does it, because China doesn't care about the fact that it's massively dirty to process this stuff. You get loads of waste, some nuclear waste as a result of it. So they don't care, radioactive stuff. They don't care about this. Everyone else does. So no one does the processing, including in the US. They used to have a big place doing rare earth processing. They don't do it anymore. Ukraine is not going to change this. There's an old mine there, former Soviet mine. It's in the occupied kind of zone towards the east of the country, which might have some rare earths in it, but no one has worked out a way of cheaply refining those rare earths, which, like I say, is the entire point of this. And even if you got that one going, sorry, I'm now going to start ranting. I'm already ranting. Even if you got that going, okay, and even if you have, with the best will in the world, assume that it's going to kind of start working, the idea of making $500 billion, I mean, that number's kind of gone away, but even a few $100 billion out of this is bonkers. The total amount of rare earths that's extracted every year is worth about $15 billion in the world. World.
Yeah.
So it's, but listen, in practice, he probably doesn't just mean rare earths. He probably means things like lithium. Ukraine might have a bit of lithium, but again, not world-changing amounts. There's a bit of titanium there. That's not unimportant, but it's not titanium metal. It's mostly the titanium that goes into paint to make it look white. So none of this is to say Ukraine doesn't have lots of stuff in the ground. It does, but it's mostly old-fashioned stuff like coal and iron. That's the stuff that Ukraine has quite a lot of. And I imagine actually get beyond this obsession, this fixation with rare earths. And I imagine actually probably most of the revenue that would eventually come would probably come from more old-fashioned things like coal and iron and maybe a bit of gas and oil that they could frack out of the ground.
So in conclusion, they're probably not there. Where they are there, they're hard to get hold of, and they're also in territory held by Russia, and they're not worth as much money as he says they are. Ed Conway, that was a masterclass. Thank you very much indeed. Ed is Sky News' economics and data editor, and I think he's rather put that one to bed. So I imagine that story's over now, and the world is going to stop talking about it.